Have you ever felt trapped in a situation with no way out where your prayers seem unheard? Today, we'll reveal how Joseph, from the depths of a pit, became governor of Egypt, and how this journey can transform your life. Matthew 21:22 teaches us that God answers our prayers, and in this video, you will learn how to apply this powerful truth in your life. Watch until the end and discover how Joseph's faith and perseverance can be the key to having your own prayers answered. Let's explore together the secrets to unlocking divine blessings and experiencing real, positive change. Whether you're facing challenges, seeking answers, or in need of a miracle, this video is exactly what you need. Are you ready to see God move powerfully in your life? Then come with me on this journey and discover how Joseph's story and the promise of Matthew 21:22 can bring deep and lasting transformation. Don't miss a second, as each insight could be the answer you've been searching for. Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel, was his father's favorite, which stirred jealousy and hatred among his brothers. This favoritism was symbolized by a colorful robe Jacob gave Joseph, further fueling resentment among his brothers. Driven by envy, they plotted to get rid of him. Seizing an opportunity, they sold Joseph as a slave to Ishmaelite merchants who were on their way to Egypt. Imagine the pain and betrayal Joseph felt being torn from his family and sold like mere merchandise. In Egypt, Joseph was bought by Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. Even as a slave, he stood out for his integrity and competence, earning Potiphar's trust, who appointed him as overseer of his household. However, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, and when rejected, falsely accused him of assault. Joseph was then thrown into prison, facing injustice and adversity once again. It's hard to imagine the frustration and despair of being imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, but Joseph held on to his faith in God. Even in prison, Joseph continued to demonstrate character and wisdom, gaining the trust of the jailer and being put in charge of other prisoners. It was there that he interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker. Joseph's interpretations proved accurate, with the cupbearer being restored to his position and the baker being executed. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him when he returned to the palace, but he was still forgotten, remaining in prison for 2 more years. The turning point in Joseph's life came when Pharaoh had disturbing dreams that no one could interpret. The cupbearer finally remembered Joseph and recommended him to Pharaoh. Joseph, trusting in God, interpreted the dreams as a prediction of 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom and insight, Pharaoh appointed him as governor of Egypt, tasked with preparing the country for the years of scarcity. Joseph, from slave and prisoner, became the second most powerful person in Egypt. Joseph's story is a powerful lesson in resilience, faith, and divine providence. Despite facing betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, he never lost hope in God. Joseph's rise to power was not just a reward for his perseverance, but also a fulfillment of God's plan to save many lives during the famine. This story reminds us that even in the most difficult circumstances, God is working in our favor, transforming our trials into triumphs. Matthew 21:22 tells us, "And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith." These words of Jesus are a powerful promise that our prayers can have a real and tangible impact on our lives, as long as they are accompanied by genuine faith. This promise, however, is not a license to ask for anything selfishly or capriciously. Jesus teaches us that genuine faith, aligned with God's will, has the power to move mountains and transform realities. Firstly, it's essential to understand that the faith Jesus speaks of is an absolute trust in God and His ability to act in our lives. When we pray, we are not merely reciting words, but expressing our complete dependence and confidence in the Lord. The faith Jesus describes is one that does not doubt, one that believes wholeheartedly that God hears and answers. This trust is crucial for our prayers to be effective. Furthermore, this verse challenges us to examine the quality of our prayers. Are we praying with genuine faith, or are we just going through religious motions? Jesus invites us to pray with the certainty that God is capable of doing the impossible. However, this promise also implies that our petitions should align with God's will. True faith does not seek only to fulfill personal desires, but to align our hearts with divine purposes. Another important dimension of this verse is recognizing that faith is not a magical force that grants us everything we want, but rather a means through which God accomplishes His will in our lives. Sometimes the answer to our prayers may not be exactly what we asked for, but something even better, according to God's wisdom and love. Faith involves trusting that God knows what's best for us, even when we don't understand His immediate answers. Lastly, Matthew 21:22 encourages us to develop a life of persistent and expectant prayer. Jesus' promise inspires us not to give up, even when the answers seem delayed. We are called to continue praying with faith, believing that God is working, often in ways we cannot see. This verse is an invitation to live a life of deep trust in God, knowing that He is faithful and powerful to fulfill His promises, and that our prayers, made with faith, can turn the impossible into reality. Joseph's story is a powerful testimony of unwavering faith in God, even in the darkest moments. Sold into slavery by his own brothers and thrown into a foreign land, Joseph could have easily lost hope. However, he kept his faith steadfast in God, trusting that despite adverse circumstances, God was with him. This unshakable faith not only sustained Joseph, but also guided him through the toughest trials. In each challenge, Joseph showed that perseverance is vital, especially when all seems lost. While in Potiphar's house, Joseph stood out not only for his competence, but also for his integrity and faithfulness to God. Even when falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison, Joseph did not allow injustice to destroy his faith. He continued to trust in God and maintain his integrity. In prison, Joseph not only survived, but thrived, earning the trust of the jailer and assuming significant responsibilities. His ability to adapt and prosper in adverse conditions is a testament to his faith and perseverance. One of the most significant moments in Joseph's life was using his God-given gifts to interpret dreams. In prison, Joseph accurately interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, which later opened the door to his release and ascent. These gifts not only highlighted Joseph, but also showed that God was working through him. By recognizing and using his gifts, Joseph could influence those around him and eventually change the course of his own life. This teaches us the importance of identifying and using our own gifts to fulfill God's plans. To identify our gifts, we must first seek a deep and ongoing relationship with God. Prayer and Bible reading are essential for understanding how God has uniquely made us and how He wants us to use these gifts. Joseph had an intimate relationship with God, which allowed him to recognize and develop his gifts. Additionally, we must be attentive to the opportunities God places in our path to use these gifts. Like Joseph, we may find our greatest opportunities in times of adversity. Trusting that God has a greater plan for our lives, even when we don't fully understand it, is a central lesson in Joseph's story. Every step of Joseph's journey, from being sold into slavery to becoming governor of Egypt, was part of the divine plan. Although Joseph could not see the full picture while at the bottom of the pit or in prison, he trusted that God was working in his life. This confidence in a greater plan is something we all need to cultivate. Often, the challenges we face are part of the process God uses to prepare us for something greater. Joseph's story teaches us that faith and perseverance go hand in hand. Even when we face betrayals, injustices, and tough times, we must continue to trust in God. Perseverance doesn't just mean passively enduring, but also acting with faith and integrity, as Joseph did. He used every opportunity to demonstrate his faithfulness to God and his abilities, even in adverse situations. This inspires us to do the same, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. To apply these lessons in our lives, we must begin by trusting in God during difficult times, believing that He has a greater purpose for us. We must seek to identify and develop our gifts, using them to serve others and glorify God. Like Joseph, we must be prepared to act with integrity and faith, regardless of circumstances. When we do this, we allow God to work through us, transforming our trials into testimonies of His faithfulness and power. Finally, Joseph's story reminds us that with faith and perseverance, we can overcome any adversity. God has a plan for each of us, and even when we don't fully understand it, we can trust that He is working for our good. By keeping our faith steadfast and using our gifts to fulfill God's purposes, we can experience profound transformation in our lives, just like Joseph. This is the hope and promise we find in Joseph's story, a story that continues to inspire and strengthen the faith of many to this day. In Matthew 21:22, Jesus instructs us, "And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith." This verse challenges us to pray with such strong and confident faith that we act as if we have already received what we ask for. This approach to prayer is not just an expression of desire, but a manifestation of absolute trust in God's power and faithfulness. When we pray with this conviction, we show that we deeply believe God is capable of accomplishing the impossible in our lives. Praying as if we have already received means our faith must be active and alive. We are not simply passively waiting for God to act, we are living in anticipation of His response. This changes our perspective and daily behavior. Instead of being consumed by doubt or fear, our attitude becomes one of hope and expectation. Like Abraham, called the father of faith because he believed in God's promises even when everything seemed against him, we are called to live out this same vibrant and unshakable faith. When we pray with faith, we must also be prepared to act according to our belief. The Bible shows us numerous examples of people who took bold steps based on their prayers and faith. Think of Noah, who built the ark before seeing a drop of rain, or Moses, who raised his staff over the Red Sea before the waters parted. Similarly, when we pray as if we have already received, we are willing to take steps of faith, trusting that God will open doors and fulfill His promises. This form of prayer also leads us into deeper communion with God. When we fully trust that He has already answered us, we are reaffirming our belief in His goodness and faithfulness. This draws us closer to Him and helps align our desires with divine will. Praying with this confidence means we are attuned to God's heart, seeking not only the fulfillment of our requests, but also a deeper understanding of His purposes for our lives. This intimacy with God is transformative and strengthens us in our journey of faith. Finally, praying as if we have already received helps us cultivate a continuous attitude of gratitude. When we believe that God is already working in response to our prayers, we begin to give thanks in advance. This gratitude not only strengthens our faith, but also changes our hearts and perspectives. Instead of focusing on our needs or anxieties, we begin to see God's hand at work in every area of our lives. Gratitude becomes a lifestyle, reinforcing our confidence in God and filling us with peace and joy, regardless of circumstances. Often when we pray, we expect an immediate response from God, and sometimes we forget that He has already begun working from the moment we first cried out to Him. Joseph's story is a clear example of how God answers our prayers and guides us through a process even when we don't realize it. Every step of Joseph's life, from being sold into slavery to becoming governor of Egypt, was part of God's divine plan. God heard Joseph's prayers from the outset and used every challenge to prepare him for the great purpose he had for his life. From the moment Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery, God was already at work in his life. It may seem difficult to understand, but each adversity Joseph faced was a crucial part of God's plan to shape and prepare him. Initially, Joseph couldn't see the big picture, but his unwavering faith in God sustained him. Even at the bottom of the pit, both literally and figuratively, Joseph trusted that God had a greater purpose for him. This confidence is something we all must cultivate, knowing that God is in control from the very first day of our prayer. In Egypt, Joseph was bought by Potiphar and quickly stood out for his competence and integrity. Even when falsely accused and thrown into prison, Joseph maintained his faith. In prison, he continued to thrive, interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Each of these experiences was preparation for the role God had planned for him. God was building in Joseph the skills and resilience needed to lead a nation during times of great crisis. His ability to interpret dreams was a crucial tool that God used to open doors for him. When Pharaoh had dreams that no one could interpret, Joseph was called upon to decipher them. His accurate interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, foreseeing 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine, was the turning point God had prepared. Joseph's ability to interpret dreams didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was developed through his experiences and challenges. God had already begun preparing Joseph for this moment long before, answering his prayers in ways Joseph may not have understood at the time. Joseph's ascent to power was rapid and remarkable, but it was not by chance. It was the result of years of divine preparation. God had shaped Joseph at every stage of his life, from slavery days to prison years. Every trial Joseph faced made him stronger and wiser, equipping him to lead Egypt during one of its greatest crises. This process teaches us that God is always working in our lives, even when we don't see immediate results. He answers our prayers from day one, preparing us for the future. Joseph's example shows us that we must trust in God's timing. Sometimes the answer to our prayers is not immediate, but that doesn't mean God isn't listening. He may be preparing us for something greater than we can imagine. Every challenge we face is an opportunity to grow and develop the skills we will need in the future. Like Joseph, we need to maintain our faith and trust that God is in control, even when the outcomes are not immediately visible. Furthermore, Joseph's story encourages us to recognize and use our gifts, even in difficult situations. Joseph used his gift of dream interpretation in prison, an apparently hopeless situation that ultimately became the springboard for his rise. Similarly, we should be attentive to opportunities to use our gifts and abilities, trusting that God can turn any situation for good. Every experience, good or bad, can be part of God's plan to prepare us for our purpose. Finally, we must remember that God answers our prayers in His time and in His way. He may be working behind the scenes, shaping our character, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for the future. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that God is always with us, hearing our prayers and guiding our steps, even when we don't realize it. So, keep your faith, use your gifts, and trust in the divine process. God has been answering your prayers from day one, preparing you for great things to come. If you enjoyed this video and want to delve deeper into the wonderful stories of the Bible and teachings of faith, don't miss our latest video. In it, we explore more powerful lessons that can transform your life. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, take this moment to subscribe. We are praying for each subscriber, and we believe that God is blessing every person who is part of this community, prospering their paths and strengthening their faith. Join us and be blessed.